My name is Sam Asher. I'm a recent graduate from Pratt's Sustainable Environmental Systems program, and my capstone is called From the Ground Up, Centering Soils in New York City Street Tree Canopy Growth. And I produced this capstone in partnership with the New York City Soil and Water Conservation District. Here's a quick look at the agenda. I'll start with an introduction, providing some context around the project. I'll delve into my objectives and methods for this research, discuss some of my key findings, provide an overview of my recommendations, and from there, I will transition into presenting the zine that I created, which was a key deliverable from this work, and end with a conclusion and have some Q&A. Okay, so on April 21st, just a few months ago, New York City launched the Urban Forest Plan, which outlined strategies to increase the city's tree canopy coverage from 22% to 30% by 2040. And tree canopy is an environmental justice issue because neighborhoods that have higher heat vulnerability indexes have lower percentages of tree canopy coverage and are also designated as disadvantaged communities by New York State. Furthermore, extreme heat vulnerability will only worsen under climate change, and the city seeks to mitigate these impacts with a variety of strategies, including the expansion of the urban canopy. A full canopy is the tree's upper layer of foliage and can reduce temperatures between 2 to 9 degrees Fahrenheit by providing shade and cooling microclimates. Tree canopies are also habitat to thousands of species. They improve air quality by filtering pollutants and producing oxygen. Trees store carbon dioxide in water, which mitigate greenhouse gas emissions and flooding. But to do all of these things to the fullest capacities, trees need healthy soils, and not all soils perform in the same way. This is a demonstration of a water infiltration test in London. And the soil on the left is from an urban forest, while the soil on the right is from a bare urban corridor. As you can see, when pouring the same amount of water into both containers, the water on the left successfully infiltrates through the soil, some of it being absorbed by the plants in the soils themselves. But on the right, the water sits on the top and does not penetrate. At a large scale, this can lead to erosion, runoff, and flooding. So to approach this research, I asked, how can New York City strategically expand its urban canopy while cultivating healthy soils that support ecosystem and community well-being? And in response, my thesis states to promote biodiversity, mitigate extreme heat and flooding, and support healthy ecosystems and communities, the city's approach to street tree stewardship must center soils across grassroots and governmental scales to achieve canopy expansion goals. I've had the pleasure of working with the New York City Soil and Water Conservation District, which sits at the intersection of research, education, and advocacy, and whose three core programs across water, soils, and education support productive ecologies in soils and trees, making them the ideal partner for this research. The New York City Soil and Water Conservation District is also a member of the Forest for All Coalition, which is made up of over 50 private and public organizations dedicated to sustaining the life of New York City's urban forest. 5 years ago, the Forest for All Coalition published the New York City Urban Forest Agenda, a critical piece of advocacy that ultimately led to the passing of Local Law 148, which mandated the creation of the Urban Forest Plan that exists today. To pursue this research, I had three core objectives. The first was to understand the relationship between soils and trees. The second, evaluating the role and impact of public maintenance and grassroots stewardship in urban canopy expansion. And the third, analyzing policies, initiatives, and plans for the incorporation of soils management. And I used a mixed methods approach across a literature review, case studies, and interviews. To start, I read plenty of books, papers, reports, and articles covering soils and trees, looking at almost 90 sources and using these findings to ground my research and frame subsequent methodologies. I also evaluated case studies of policies and plans addressing soils, trees, and their functioning capacities. And lastly, I conducted 17 interviews with experts and stakeholders across a variety of disciplines to understand soils, stewardship, and street tree health from the experts. A few, I think, are on this call today. So hi, thanks for being here. And many of my interviewees were situated across multiple disciplines and stakeholder categories, giving them a really critical interdisciplinary perspective. To start, I wanted to understand soils. So here is what I think to be a fairly comprehensive but lengthy definition that I've broken down into three primary takeaways. The first is that soils are dynamic. They're constantly changing as a result of different biological and chemical processes, and these changes impact soil capacities. The second, soils can hold liquids and gases and have an important role in storing and cycling chemicals like carbon dioxide, water, and oxygen, which are all critical to tree health and tree growth. And lastly, soils are alive. They support life, they are full of living organisms, and are home to 60% of all life on Earth, making them biodiversity hotspots. Soils are more than just dirt, and their capacities for these functions are so important to the health of plants, animals, and people. But as demonstrated, capacities of soils can change. And this is an example of soil compaction, which is a huge threat to street tree health and plant health as a whole. Compaction is caused by pedestrian traffic and vibrations from different types of transit infrastructure, like underground trains and cars, and is a major threat to soil's abilities to function. Compaction inhibits tree growth, which reduces a tree's ability to increase its leaf area and ultimately develop a full canopy. Compaction happens when soil particles have very little pore spaces, leaving little room to hold oxygen and water, causing water to pool on top of tree beds, like shown in the container demonstration, and contributes to runoff and flooding. Reduced soil oxygen also inhibits tree root growth, decreasing trees' water and nutrient uptake, leading to less photosynthesis, less carbon dioxide removal, and less growth and less canopy. And of the 7 million trees in New York City, approximately 10% are street trees. And street trees also make up a pretty sizable amount of the city's canopy, about a quarter. But because of their proximity to the public right of way, street trees face some of the most difficult growing conditions in New York City's urban forest. Their proximity to vehicular and pedestrian traffic makes them extremely susceptible to compaction. In evaluating the city's responsibility for street trees, New York City Parks is the overseeing agency and has several intersection points over the course of a tree's life. These include sapling maintenance contracts within 2 years of planting, non-urgent pruning every 7 years, and the 9-year planting cycle, which was introduced recently. More urgent issues are reported to 311, like hazardous branches or dead trees, and these are prioritized and addressed on an as-needed basis, depending on the capacity. But what's missing is regular care during the tree's critical growth period between 2 to 5 years of age. To understand this, I looked at funding, and while the city's fiscal year 26 budget is over $120 billion, less than 1% at approximately 0.6% has been allocated for the Parks Department, and less than 5% of that 0.6% goes to forestry. This gap in municipal care, however, is supplemented by volunteers across hundreds of organizations. Legally, anyone can take care of a street tree. And here I've just shown an example of 6 organizations who have cared for street trees in the last 180 days, according to the New York City Parks' tree map. But there are so many more than the organizations shown here. And through my evaluations of street tree stewardship materials and conversations with stewards, I found that all of the key activities in street tree care support the health of trees through healthy soil cultivation, which includes removing litter, weeding, cultivating soil, applying compost and mulch, and of course, water. And I qualitatively analyzed my interviews into 5 key buckets, which were barriers to effective stewardship, community engagement and grassroots impact, policy and planning gaps and opportunities, soil health awareness and knowledge, and stewardship practices and interventions. I'm going to share a couple of quotes. The first, and this was a really core finding, is that street tree stewards are cognizant of the impacts of compaction on street trees. And understand the importance of recurring maintenance, how compaction is something that you don't just fix once, but you have to return and cultivate soils on a regular basis. Um, there was also a lot of comments related to the physical labor required to care for a street tree, especially in transporting water, which is notably really difficult to access, and a major challenge in caring for street trees. But lastly, street tree stewardship helps communities and individuals realize that street trees are critical infrastructure and are important investments in our city's resilience. And caring for street trees and demonstrating that people care for street trees has a significant impact and actually leads to better care of street tree beds from their surrounding communities. Ultimately, this demonstrates that there is a cycle of care between communities, soils, and trees. And uh, this is so important and really at the heart of this work is understanding this relationship throughout our urban ecosystem, but also understanding that there are some challenges and some gaps that remain in this process that relies on volunteer-based labor. So taking a look more at the top-down scale to understand the policy and planning conditions that contribute to the top-down deprioritization or the existing conditions of urban soils, I evaluated four street tree and urban forest management plans across cities with similar climates and tree species. I looked at a bunch of different criteria, but one of them that I'm going to talk about is the number of times that they mentioned soil. While Barcelona and Philadelphia mentioned soil, or they had the highest score of soil mentions per page, New York City and Chicago had the lowest. And just because soil is mentioned does not necessarily mean a plan is good or bad. But I think it's really important to think about how all trees need soil to survive. And if tree plans and urban forestry plans are not acknowledging soils, then there is a huge piece of the plan and of the strategy that's missing. And even the successful plans that mentioned soil a lot had some shortcomings. In the Barcelona plan, while there were explicit identifications of the relationship between soils and street trees and a mention of compaction as a key stressor, there weren't any mentions of strategies for relieving compaction at scale. And in the Philadelphia plan, compaction was also called out, and there was an emphasis on the need for maintenance plans to mitigate these conditions, but these mitigation techniques weren't specified. I also took a look at some more higher level national and international policies. And generally, the complexities of soils are not understood across most policies, which seem to have a singular interpretation of them, whether that's for agricultural capacity or contamination. But the one policy that I found was really encompassing of these complexities was the EU soil mission. It connects to the EU's biodiversity and climate initiatives, is both based in research and advocacy and education, and is looking at both urban and peri-urban environments. It's really amazing, and really what's missing here is the replication of a policy like this internationally in other parts of the world. So, with this broad understanding of soil science, street tree care, and urban soils policies, I synthesized these findings into my recommendations, which sit across three categories. The first is to make soils visible. In order to address the soil health conditions of street trees in New York City, we need to start talking about soils and we need to elevate soils in these conversations. One of the ways that soils are invisible is the fact that they're not mentioned enough in the urban forest plan, but soils are extremely visible in the volunteer-based street tree stewardship programming. Um, the second key category is strengthening this soil stewardship landscape. So through investments in green jobs and urban forestry career paths, as well as the operationalization of solidarity economies, making it more accessible to care for street trees citywide. And the third is supporting street tree canopy development by improving data-driven decision making in New York City's Parks' tree map, and developing some kind of stewardship rewards program similar to Lower East Side Ecology Center's Coolest Block on the Lower East Side or the Brooklyn Botanic Gardens Greenest Block in Brooklyn. But at the core of this work, and why I'm here to present to you today, was my goal and deliverable to create an accessible resource that could serve as an education and advocacy tool for centering soils and urban forestry conversations. And I'm very excited to share it for the first time. So without further ado, let me just do some. Oh, okay. Technical difficulties. Sorry, everyone. A moment of suspense. Okay, here we go. Okay, so this is the zine I've put together. My objective here was to make something that complements all of the existing resources that are being created by different block associations, street tree stewardship groups, environmental NGOs, botanic gardens, complementary, not duplicative, and to be accessible to anybody from experts in urban ecology to those who are just starting to get curious in how to care for urban trees. Chose to make a zine because I find the format to be super accessible, and also wanted this to be something that was tactile and constantly evolving. And lastly, this is focused on New York City, but many of the lessons and practices here can be applied to cities elsewhere. So this is the introduction. I'm going to read a few quotes here, but actually, let me. Here's a link for a digital copy if people want to read along, as well as a form that you can fill out if you're interested in receiving a printed copy. Just put that in the chat. But I, yeah, stewarding soils and street tree beds has a grounding message. To equitably expand street tree canopy coverage, one must look down towards the soils. And moving to the next page on a note, stewarding soils and street tree beds, where to start is by no means complete. The zine is as dynamic as street tree soils themselves, in need of consistent care to achieve its full potential. And that's something I really want to emphasize here because I'm not an expert in all things trees and soils. This project took place over the course of 5 months. And while I did a lot of research, I don't know everything. And I also could not have come to any of these conclusions without the support and the insights of experts, of people who have been doing this work far longer than I have. And so I really, I preface this to say that this is just a starting point for what a resource like this can look like. So to start, I introduce the soil cast of characters and talk about the soil food web and all of the critters that make soils make soils so important in all of the things like storing and cycling chemicals and producing organic matter. And also, after meeting soils, it's important to understand trees. In New York City, we have the New York City Parks' tree map, which is a really accessible tool for learning more about the trees in your neighborhood and your community. There are opportunities to report problems with dead limbs and branches, or to filter for trees that have smaller trunk diameters, which are likely younger trees that need more prioritized care. And of course, I wanted to talk about the importance of leaving the leaves. One of the things that is used in so many street tree stewardship activities and is really important is mulch, but trees also provide their own mulch in fall months. And leaves are extremely important habitats for so many different insects and can also supply organic material and nutrients to tree beds. I also talk about cycles of care here because I think that's really at the core of this project is the relationship between communities, soils, trees, and the way that all of these benefits can ripple outwards throughout all of these relationships if we continue to care for them. And then, of course, the challenges of street trees and talking about compaction and what this looks like, how this impacts trees, and what soils that are not compacted can support in street tree beds. So moving on to the practice of caring for street trees, understanding, when looking at a tree bed, what do you see? Is there trash there? Are there other plants? Is there dog waste? Something that I see often are different things tied to tree trunks. And I think it's so important to have some type of signage to indicate a tree is being cared for, but this can also cause problems. And then understanding like the tree bed itself, what color is the soils? What can you tell about how often these soils have been interacted with? How recently organic matter was applied? If you pour water, how fast does it infiltrate? And all of these things are clues that can indicate what types of interventions are needed for this tree. And then moving on to some of the more practical applications and the tools that you'll need across stewardship supplies. Gloves is always one of the most important things. And I also have here signs indicating trees are cared for, and tree guards, which can protect trees from pedestrian compaction and dog waste. And then include some different care recipes depending on what these conditions might look like. And last but not least, logging your work is so important. There are so many organizations that are doing this, which is so fantastic. But in order to really understand where the gaps are in street tree care, there needs to be some type of record of how often trees are being cared for. So using New York City Parks' tree care activities, tree care recording function is really critical here. And here I provide a non-exhaustive list of ways to get involved, different organizations that are doing street tree care citywide or that are borough specific, as well as places on where you can find resources like compost, mulch, and tools. And lastly, have a bunch of resources for further exploration, whether it's books like the Urban Soil Guide or programs like the New York City Master Composter Certificate course, and different continuing education programs related to soils and trees. I also wanted to give a huge thank you to Shino and Tatiana for trusting me with this work and for their support throughout this project. I'm so honored to have created this and to, yeah, it's been such a wonderful experience, and I'm really so pleased to share it with you all. And just bear with me one more second while I switch back to my other uh my other screen. I've been ending this presentation on this quote by Dr. Charles Kellogg. All life depends on the soil, and there could be no life without soil and no soil without life. They have evolved together. I think this really gets at what I'm trying to get across with this work is that there's so many different complex parts of our urban ecosystem that are often not considered and not talked about in the ways that we talk about urban resiliency and sustainability. And it's not soils or trees, but it's both of them together. And with this work, I really hope that there can be more conversations about all of the different micro and macroorganisms that contribute to healthy and resilient cities and ultimately support a more sustainable and resilient New York. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sam. That was incredible. And there's so much that I didn't know. And thank you for doing this work. Thank you for the research. And thank you for the zine. It's really amazing work. Um, we were expecting a lot more people, but since we don't have that many people, I'm just gonna allow people to be able to unmute themselves, moving into Q&A. But I would like people to raise hands if you can, or put in the chat that you would like to ask a question. So we'll open it up for Q&A. You can either raise hand or put in the chat and we'll call on you. I have a raised
Go
hand.
ahead, Joel.
Yep.
I'm sorry, did you call on me?
Yes, go
Yes.
ahead.
Okay, I'm also concerned about the toxicity of the soils. Um, have you done any soil analysis?
So I'm very familiar with urban soil contamination, and for because this project was only taking place over the course of 5 months and I had a limited amount of resources, I wasn't able to do a lot of soil testing of these street tree beds. I do know that parks typically uses a structural soil for street trees, so it's usually not the same types of contaminants that may be found in some of the in-ground soils throughout the city, like maybe in community gardens or on private properties. However, there's definitely concerns of contaminants leaching from like different types of waste, from road salt, from construction. And because of that, I think my biggest recommendation is just wearing gloves, washing your hands, protecting yourself and your community, and also looking into some of the local soil testing resources that exist in New York City, whether that's Urban Soils Institute's free soil testing on Governor's Island or Brooklyn College's Urban Soils Lab. But I really appreciate the question, and I think it's such an important thing to think about when considering urban soils.
That some of the contaminants that we found were placed there by the city. For a while, the city had a really large rat control program. The Department of Health put out large inordinate amounts of arsenic, and we're
Mhm.
finding that at nitre grounds and elsewhere. So I think it's really important to, it's runoff, and actually, I'm sure they put things into some of the tree wells. So something to be concerned about.
Absolutely. Koki?
Hi, Sam. Thanks for your presentation and good to see you again. I have two questions. One is more theoretical, I guess. I'm wondering, whenever you saw um, healthy street tree beds, like what we already know, like the bad stuff. So, like, when you ever came across a good one, what kind of practices did you see actually working and being effective for healthy soil?
That's a great question. That was the two parts?
Well, now the second question
Okay.
is, working at the Brotherhood Sister Soul and us having a lot of community engagement, being stewards of many trees. I was just going to ask if I filled out a form. I wanted to ask about the zine, if it was a way that I could have some to share with people uptown, and we can also like give it out to volunteers and in our courses too.
Yeah, yeah.
That's Thank
Amazing.
you.
Yeah, thank you so much for filling out the form. You are way ahead of me. So gauging interest just to see like how many people would want copies. I will need to check in with a printer and figure out how to print, just to answer the second question first. But I'm definitely hoping to distribute physical copies throughout the city once I figure out how to do that. So if anybody knows of anyone who could print, actually, let me know. But
Well,
yes,
well, just to go off of that, is it a eight page zine?
it is uh 9 pages. Or it's
Eight.
I
Okay.
there's like a special like booklet printing. But we
Okay.
can also chat. We can chat offline about that. But to
Thank you.
answer your first question, seeing healthy street tree beds, I think the indicators are usually that there is someone caring for them, that they are actively being stewarded by whether it's a block association or a community group or a local business improvement district. There's usually some type of sign or like a little placard that is proof of that care that's being given to that street tree. And across, all of my many walks along New York City sidewalks and seeing all these different street trees, that has been something that rings true for any of the trees that I see that look like they're doing super well. And generally, trees that are maybe not doing as well are often neglected, though not always. I think that sometimes, street trees, even that are cared for, um, still don't have the best circumstances and are taken down, whether it's like due to heavy winds or some crazy storms. But for the most part, trees that look like they're thriving have indicators that they are being cared for by communities.
All right, Sam. Thank you so much. These are good tactics, and we will talk offline.
Sounds
Appreciate you.
good. Of course. Yeah. Thanks for the questions. Okay.
Before you
Local
go
nature.
to, that's probably Georgia, but before you go there, Marcia has a question in the chat. Marcia, would you like to unmute yourself?
Hi, Sam, and thanks, for noticing that. So, I'm going to be talking with a group of elementary school teachers in a few weeks about soils, and I wondered if you had some insight. I'm going to be talking about contaminated soils as part of that because there is, oh, a fairly well-founded impression that most urban soils have some level of contaminants, and if you're dealing with children, you might need to take some precautions, or even if you're dealing with anybody, any local, anyone's, you might want to take some precautions with handling the soil, picking it up and doing the things that I would do, smell it, see how moist it is, how, what it feels like, is it gravelly, is it sandy, etc. Do you have any key ideas for like maybe 3 key points or something for talking with teachers who are learning about soil in order to teach their students, their elementary school students, about contamination? Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the question, Marcia. And that's such a great question. I have done research in urban soil contamination, but I haven't thought about how to approach the subject for a younger audience. And something that I did talk to Shino and Tatiana about was how to address contamination in the context of this research, especially because my scope was exclusively looking at street trees. And I think something that I've come to understand for myself in New York City and in any city really is assume contaminated unless proven otherwise. Um, Soils are sinks for so many different types of materials, and because of that, and they're also, these materials can be really difficult to detect. There is this level of invisibility in soil contamination. And so always sort of thinking about what the potential risks are and exercising caution, whether that's using gloves, making sure that you're not in a garden where there's bare uncovered soil on a super dry, hot, and windy day. And if you are maybe adding extra layers of precaution, like wearing a mask to reduce pathways to exposure. but also applying organic material and mulch to cover areas of bare soil or just putting plants in the ground is a really great way to add a new layer of protection against some of those contaminants. I'll also preface this with I'm not a soil scientist, and I know for a fact that there are so many people who are experts in this field in this call. I want to answer your question, but also I think that some folks at like the Urban Soils Institute or at Cornell's Agriculture and Life Sciences or Cornell Cooperative Extension, Brooklyn College's Urban Soil Lab probably have some really excellent resources for answering some of these questions. Georgia, I think you had
Okay,
your
thank
hand up
you.
next.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Hi, Sam. Um, this is really great. I love zines. Um, the it seems like you've developed a really fun and accessible pattern language for thinking about street tree care. The design elements are immediately accessible, so you know what each of those graphic elements mean. Um, And the care recipes, I think, are one of my favorite elements of the zine. I'm curious about your design process, like how you came up with that particular component of a care recipe. Are there other care recipes that you considered? And one more piece, is there a care recipe that would lead to certain kinds of like soil health outcomes? If I do this and this and this and this, what could I imagine or what would I be supporting in my soil in terms of like, will I have more fungi than microbes or microbes than bacteria? Thank you very much. This is really wonderful.
Thank you, Georgia, and thank you so much for the question. To start with my design process and care recipes, I I don't think I think I was always thinking about some type of matrix where, you know, if you look at this is the condition, and these are the tools that, you know, you'll always need. And a lot of this came from reviewing different street tree stewardship materials that are put together and published by different organizations in New York City, and just finding the common elements across all of these activities. And then doing research and seeing like, okay, well, if you have litter, you'll definitely need a plastic bag. If you have compacted soil, you'll definitely need a hand cultivator. And I don't have nothing is coming to mind of like exemplary care recipes, but it is very possible that there was something that I saw that like really inspired this that may come to me later. And in terms of the outcomes, I think something I've learned about soils is that change happens very slowly and on long and large timescales. And so, um, as a society and as living in a time where we're used to such instant gratification, sorry, um, I've done some experimentation in a dye garden on Pratt's campus and learned that a lot of my hypotheses would not be realized for a year, for maybe even several years. And I think part of this is understanding that there's the importance of repetitive maintenance, of recurring maintenance, of these cycles of care, but also in engaging in these care cycles and engaging in this continuation of stewardship, ultimately like supporting a healthier tree, a larger canopy, a tree bed that is more capable of absorbing more stormwater runoff, or a tree that's more capable of producing more oxygen. And so I think that's to me it's about like the long-term impacts of just having a healthy tree that can function to its highest capacity. I hope that answered your question. Mary Jo, I think you are next in line. Um, Mary Jo, are you there? If not, Karsten, would you like to ask your question next or unmute?
Yes, hi Sam, Karsten Glazer here. Great topic. I'm a consulting arborist. I've been involved in the trees and construction industry across the city of New York for the last 30 years. I've seen firsthand what happens to trees in the case of new building construction, most of it driven because of impacts to soil. But I just want to bring up for your thought bank is just how many city agencies. I mean, we all look to parks for their leadership and as urban forest managers and tree care providers. But it's just astonishing how many other city agencies there are that actually sabotage, sometimes deliberately or just because of the enormity of these agencies, that just have such an indifference to the urban forest and the individual trees that reside in our neighborhood. And as an arborist, my focus is on the individual trees and the individual care that we're able to bring to them. New York City DOT is notorious for handing out permits for new sidewalk installation, a new curb installation, which is often the nails in the coffin for street trees because of excavation. DEP is another, handing out permits to sewer subsurface utility installers that just dig up sidewalks and dig trenches and rip up tree roots. And the enforcement capabilities of Parks Department and others is just, it's so far, we're trying to reach 30% canopy by 2030, although that number has now changed to 2040 because we're realizing we're losing more of our large trees than the beneficial ones than all the small ones that we're installing. And just a new fact that I found out, we've been told that it takes 10 years for a new tree planting before we get a return on the investment on benefits and services they deliver. It's now 40 years. It was a miscalculation. Wow. So the cars say the carbon benefits from tree canopy is going to take you 40 years on a new tree installed. And so I think if there's anything in this bunch, in this group right here that's attending, is to realize that, it's a real struggle. It goes beyond soil. I'm not diminishing your soil intent here. Everything's about the soil. I understand that. But just in this city and the scale and magnitude of building construction and infrastructure expansion, it's somewhat heartbreaking for those that really want to fight for expanding urban greening, and it's it's a challenge. It really is. And I appreciate your talk. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you so much, Carson. And yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think that having so many agencies with competing priorities that are not really understanding the importance of trees as critical infrastructure, and yeah, the social aspects of caring for trees and disregarding them as not important or maybe not there. I know that, and I'll say this as I have a slight conflict of interest because I am currently an intern at DOT. But I know that they are working on trying to approve more sidewalk expansions, or sorry, more tree bed expansions when possible. But there are so many different moving parts that go into that approval process. And again, different priorities, whether that is accessibility, or different programming or use of curb space. But I think it's such a great point, and I really appreciate you raising it. Mary Jo, I did see your question. Sorry, Marion. I know Mary Jo asked this a little bit ago, if I was able to investigate what types of plant materials are beneficial to be planted in tree beds that would help turn the dirt into the soil. So to that point, I know that there are a couple different organizations that are doing some experimentation with native plants in tree beds to learn more about how these plants can develop a symbiotic relationship with street trees and contribute organic material without outcompeting for water and nutrients. I know Gowanus Canal Conservancy is involved in that work, as is Lower East Side Ecology Center. And Parks Pecan Plant Nursery has also been doing some testing on this. I don't have the details of that, but I definitely recommend getting in touch with folks at those organizations. And yeah, was that an answer your question in any way?
Yeah,
Go ahead,
we're
Mary
good.
Jo.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we can go to Marion.
All right, Marion, go ahead.
That's a lovely presentation, Sam. And Karsten took my question. So I'm gonna piggyback on that. So I know that in new developments, developers are allowed to rip up trees and then replace them. So there's a whole cadre of contractors involved in that chain of events, including people who promise developers will get you through the permitting. I think that you might already have done this. Give your presentation to the mayor's office and DOB, the people who permit those processes, and perhaps some classes could be arranged, and your zine could be used to educate some of the people who are handlers for the developers, as well as get the new management of whatever buildings started on the right foot, shall we say. I think that's the second part, is that your word count of 8 words, 8 count for soil is absolutely genius, because I know that in the development of this forest plan, they have not thought about soil. They have not thought about the amount of permeable land that is required to support the canopy. Because I explicitly asked that, and explicitly the mayor's office dodged that question. So I think that we all have a lot of work to do, and I'm going to say that outright in front of whoever might be representing the mayor's office in this chat, because I don't mind being an asshole and just keep raising this question. Permeable soil, area of permeable soil in the city. Thank you.
Thanks, Marion. Yeah, if anyone is here from DOB or the mayor's office and wants to get in touch, my contact is on the slide and I would be happy to chat. Joel, would you mind if Ryan asks the next question, just since you've asked one already? Okay.
Hey, no problem.
Hey, Sam, really appreciate the presentation. I'm coming at this kind of from a very unique standpoint where my company actually oversees almost all of the remediation and the actual street tree planting operations you were talking about. Arcadis covers for all the contracts they've won, the initial street tree planting, and then the actual block pruning inspections later, any kind of trees and sidewalks work. Also the new tree rescue contract where they're expanding the actual planting beds, decompact the soil, all of that. So really appreciate this. This hit all very close to home. So love that. I guess my question's more on the other side of it, just kind of curious about any tips you have or any further information you have with kind of the difficulties and how you best handled connecting between these like larger organizations especially coming at it from your end and then dealing with it like a government entity where it can be a little bit difficult.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for the question, Ryan. And I am familiar with Arcadis's street tree work. I was at a presentation a couple weeks ago and learned about the fantastic survival rate of the street trees that y'all are caring for. So great job there. Um, and I think that, yeah, one of the most challenging pieces of this puzzle is how to effectively communicate the importance of this work to people across different scales. Obviously, those who are already engaged in street tree stewardship and urban ecology are probably already going to be thinking about these problems. And I would say that's likely everybody who's on this call today. But for so many others, these are not at the forefront of people's minds. And something else I also came across in my research was this like there being some turf wars or competition between different groups. And I think part of that is having a mental shift and realizing that like there is no one group that should be the sole owner or steward of all of these assets. I think having a collaborative and a collective mindset towards like doing the street tree care is really important. And I think part of it is, for me at least, is really just talking about soils, talking about things that we don't talk about at different meetings and presentations and to different city agencies. And I will say that I was able to give this presentation to my colleagues at DOT, many of whom are not thinking about soils at all and have now told me that they see compacted soils and street trees every day, and all they want to do is figure out how they can help. So I think having these conversations and hopefully distributing these materials once I figure out how to print a booklet at scale. But appreciate the question. Joel.
Here I am. I'm, as you see in the notes, I'm very concerned about the lack of enforcement. The city's owed $2.1 billion. Well, we've come across people, contractors that have been actually caught and fined. A lot of people don't pay. And then we also caught right in front of my block tree pruning that was going on at 6:30 in the morning without any supervision. And they were cutting the trees right onto the street. And they said they were under supervision, but there was right before Parks is there. So I think part of the problem is the enforcement issue. And we're working on a new program, partly with Austin's help, is that the tree wardens out there start getting some enforcement capabilities, working the legislation, that right now a Parks Department person has to see a problem before they would stop a contractor or someone else to fine. We want to work it out that citizen stewards um, get given the power that if they see something, they call something in, at least that gives a temporary stop for that action. So the city's going through a cat and mouse game, but it's on the streets. And also I do a lot of work on nature properties, and there's a lot of unfettered construction that goes on. And when they get caught, there's no remedy. And the other thing I just want to say, the city has something called the bad actor policy that when they catch someone that's violating the contractor permits, the city has the right not to permit again. But we see from all the damage that's going on, they're not enforcing that. So as Carson pointed out, there's a lot of new trees being planted, but we're not saving the old. And there's definitely ways that we're doing it. We also love input on coming up with this new legislation.
That's really interesting. I think something I did come across is that in some cities, I think specifically Toronto, it's illegal to damage a tree or to cut down a tree. And so having like different levels of legislative protection is definitely something that I think could strengthen this landscape. But something I think fines, yeah, like the carrot versus the stick is always a really complicated complicated choice to measure, and oftentimes a penalty fine does not even like change behavior. But that's really interesting, and I really appreciate you sharing that. I did also want to say that Up From the Roots by Jim Urban, which Karsten put in the chat, was a key reference in my research. It's really fantastic. Um, Cornell's soil testing program is also super excellent. They offer free soil testing to community gardens. You just have to fill out a form. And Elena posted the Legacy Led book, which is also so great, and a really great resource, Marcia, maybe for some of that, like children education or educating teachers about soil contamination. Um, Ryan, I see your question. Um, how many times have I had to correct people calling soil dirt? I think most of my friends know not to use the word dirt around me now, but probably more often than I would like, but hopefully less in the future now that I have talked everyone's ear off about soil. I know we're at 5:01, and so I want to be mindful of everyone's time. But if anyone has any last questions, you can put them in the chat. But otherwise, thank you all for being here. I so appreciate you taking the time to ask questions, to engage, to listen. And please feel free to reach out if you have any additional thoughts, feedback, or comments, and look forward to continuing to support the urban forest together.